Welcome to Threads of Truth, the podcast where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. Today, we're going to explore a profoundly baffling and heartbreaking case from Washington, D.C., one that has haunted a city for a decade: the disappearance of 8-year-old Relisha Rudd. Relisha was a young girl who simply vanished from a city homeless shelter back in 2014, and the immediate questions that sprung up were, and still are, just staggering. How could a child disappear so completely from a system specifically designed to protect her? And maybe even more unsettling, how could her absence go unnoticed for such a long time?
It's truly an enigma. It cuts right to the core of what we expect from our social safety nets, especially when it comes to the most vulnerable among us children. The central mysteries here are just incredibly complex. You've got the disturbingly long delay in reporting Relisha missing, then the glaring, multi-layered failures of, numerous systems that were supposed to be her guardians, and perhaps most tragically, the fact that the prime suspect, a man named Khalil Tatum, died by suicide before he could ever be thoroughly questioned. His death created this massive, painful void, leaving behind a profound lack of answers that, persists to this very day. It makes true closure just incredibly elusive for everyone invested in her story.
Right. That void of answers is precisely what we aim to shed some light on here. In this exploration, we're not just recounting facts. We're going to meticulously walk through the documented timeline, really examining the pivotal moments that shaped this tragedy. We'll follow the threads of truth that illuminate not only the profound systemic failures at play, but also the often overlooked and uncomfortable role of poverty and race in cases like Relisha's. Our mission is to guide you, our listener, through the known facts, the lingering, agonizing questions, and, the persistent hope for answers in Relisha's story. The powerful and somber journey, for sure, but one that offers crucial insights into the unseen realities and vulnerabilities within our own communities. So let's begin by painting a more vivid picture of Relisha Rudd herself. Who was this little girl at the heart of such a profound and enduring mystery? Relisha was an 8-year-old African-American girl, apparently full of spirit, living in Washington, D.C. At the time of her disappearance in 2014, she was residing with her mother, Shamika Young, and her 3 younger brothers. They were living at what was known as the D.C. General Family Shelter. Now, this wasn't just any temporary lodging. It was this sprawling, city-run facility. It used to be a hospital, actually, controversially converted into a shelter. It was designed to be a temporary haven for families experiencing homelessness, often housing hundreds of people, sometimes over 200 families at once, in what critics often described as a kind of barracks-style environment. You can just imagine the constant hum of activity, the crowds, the transient nature of its population, and in the midst of it all, this bright young girl trying to navigate her world.
Yeah, and from all accounts, Relisha was described as a bright, happy, and remarkably resilient child, especially, considering the incredibly challenging and unstable circumstances she and her family faced daily. Just think about what it means for an 8-year-old to call a homeless shelter home. It inherently places a child in an extremely vulnerable position, doesn't it? Making them entirely reliant on the systems and the people within those systems for their basic safety and well-being. D.C. General, as a city-run homeless shelter, was fundamentally intended to be a place of protection, a secure environment where vulnerable populations, particularly children, could reside while their families worked to regain stability. The contrast between this intention and what tragically unfolded is, it's stark.
And yet, as the narrative of Relisha's disappearance tragically illustrates, the very institution designed to protect her became a central, horrifying part of her vanishing. This case, the inexplicable disappearance of Relisha Rudd, it ignited this intense public outcry, and eventually led to absolutely scathing criticism of the city's overall handling of homelessness, of its child welfare systems, and crucially, of the pervasive lack of institutional oversight at facilities like D.C. General. This intense scrutiny, fueled by the shock and anger over Relisha's fate, culminated in the shelter's eventual and highly controversial closure in 2018. It was a direct, albeit belated, acknowledgement of the profound systemic failures that Relisha's case just laid bare.
Yeah, the closure itself speaks volumes about the perceived depth of these failures. But central to this entire devastating story is the individual who became the prime suspect, Khalil Tatum. Tatum was a 51-year-old janitor employed directly at the D.C. General Family Shelter. It was a position that granted him unsupervised access to families and children residing there. What's truly shocking and deeply unsettling about his presence in such a sensitive environment is his extensive background. He had a lengthy criminal record stretching back years, including multiple arrests for burglary, larceny, even more serious offenses like aggravated assault back in 1993, though that particular charge was later dismissed. So this immediately raises a monumental and uncomfortable question, right? How is an individual with such a documented problematic criminal history, especially one involving dishonesty and a past violent charge, how is he hired to work in a facility housing vulnerable children, a place that was meant to be their sanctuary? It's just a glaring red flag in hindsight, something that should have been caught, absolutely prevented by any competent vetting process.
It's astonishing. Infuriating when you look back, isn't it? And his methods of interacting with families at the shelter only deepened the deception and highlighted the dangerous gaps in oversight. Tatum was known to have, well, inappropriately fraternized with children and their families, cultivating relationships that went far beyond his job description. He'd often give them small gifts, candy, snacks, even toys, gradually cultivating this false sense of trust, presenting himself as this benevolent, caring figure. It was this insidious pattern of manipulation that led Relisha's mother, Shamika Young, to unfortunately allow her daughter to be with Tatum. She genuinely believed he was taking Relisha to see a doctor, an act of trust, just tragically and profoundly misplaced. This misplaced trust, coupled with the glaring systemic failures we'll get into, then led us into the chilling, minute-by-minute timeline of Relisha's last known movements. Let's walk through this factual timeline step by step, because every date, every detail, every overlooked moment is just crucial to understanding this tragedy. The first key piece of documented evidence placing Tatum and Relisha together comes from February 26, 2014. Surveillance footage from a Holiday Inn Express in Northeast D.C. captures them walking down a hallway. This footage, while maybe not immediately alarming at the time, became the earliest recorded interaction in this specific timeline that has been central to the investigation since. It unequivocally shows them together, outside the shelter, just days before her confirmed disappearance. The interactions appear casual, seemingly uneventful, but it definitely sets the stage for the dark events to come.
And then we arrive at March 1st, 2014. This date is tragically considered the last confirmed sighting of Relisha Rudd. More surveillance footage, this time from a Days Inn on New York Avenue in D.C., captures Relisha walking with Tatum into a room. The images from this day are profoundly haunting for investigators and her family alike. It's the last time Relisha is definitively seen alive. She appears to walk willingly, maybe still under the impression she was going to a doctor or on some kind of outing, utterly unaware of the danger she was in.
And the specific visual details from that footage have heartbreakingly become iconic in the search for her, burned into the public consciousness. Relisha was wearing a distinctive purple jacket and bright pink boots, details that have been emblazoned on missing person posters for a decade now, a poignant and heartbreaking reminder of the little girl who simply vanished. But what happened immediately after that March 1st sighting is equally, if not more, alarming. It reveals an institutional oversight that almost defies belief.
What's profoundly unsettling here is that from March 1st through March 19th, Relisha was not in school. For nearly 3 weeks, 18 critical days, an 8-year-old child was absent from her classes, and it largely went unnoticed by the very institutions tasked with safeguarding her. Her mother, Shamika Young, had submitted notes explaining these absences. The notes claimed they were due to health reasons and were supposedly from a Dr. Tatum. Now, this points to a critical flaw in the school's truancy protocol.
A huge flaw.
Yeah. Typically, for prolonged absences, especially for children designated as at risk because they're living in a shelter, standard procedure demands a direct call to the listed medical professional, or after a few days, a visit from a truancy officer. The fact that these basic checks were bypassed for nearly 3 weeks indicates a profound breakdown in the system, potentially due to severe understaffing or maybe a dangerous miscategorization of Relisha's vulnerability, just allowing a perilous situation to fester.
Right. This acceptance of fake notes and the lack of follow-up truly represent a critical systemic failure point. This wasn't just an oversight. It was effectively a cover-up at the school level. Maybe unintentional, but a cover-up nonetheless. Where excuses for Relisha's absence, including these patently fraudulent doctor's notes, were accepted without adequate verification. It allowed her absence to continue for far too long. It bought precious time for Tatum, time that may have been used to conceal his actions and preventing any early intervention that might have saved Relisha.
Indeed. The system that was specifically supposed to flag prolonged absences for a child in a vulnerable living situation, the safety net that should have snapped taut, simply failed to engage. The alarm should have been raised much, much sooner. And that finally and really belatedly happened on March 19th, 2014.
That day became the turning point, and it was sparked by an individual's persistent concern rather than an automatic system flag, which is telling. A social worker from Relisha's school, growing increasingly concerned about her prolonged and unexplained absence, took the initiative to go directly to the D.C. General Shelter to investigate in person. It speaks volumes, doesn't it, about the state of interagency communication and oversight, that this personal intervention was necessary to trigger a real investigation.
And what the social worker painstakingly discovered was chilling. There was no Dr. Tatum on any official records connected to the shelter or the family, and the individual identified as Tatum was, in fact, Khalil Tatum, a janitor. It was at this critical juncture, nearly 3 weeks after her last confirmed sighting, that Relisha was officially reported missing, and an Amber Alert was finally issued. This entire chain of events just laid bare the gaping systemic gaps and the tragically slow, fragmented response of both the shelter staff and the authorities in realizing and acting upon her disappearance. It was a tragic testament to a child falling through every single crack.
And the very next day, March 20, 2014, the situation took an even darker and more sinister turn, dramatically escalating the severity and implications of the case. Khalil Tatum's wife, Andrea Tatum, was found dead from a gunshot wound to the head in a motel room in Prince George's County, Maryland. This immediately transformed the search for a missing child into something far more sinister. Tatum was now not just a person of interest in Relisha's disappearance, but explicitly a suspect in a homicide. The urgency just intensified exponentially.
Oh, absolutely. The manhunt for Khalil Tatum became this full-scale, citywide pursuit, intensifying across Washington, D.C. and into surrounding Maryland suburbs. After more than a week of intense searching, on March 31st, 2014, Tatum's body was discovered. Found in a shed within Kenilworth Park. Now, this is a large, sprawling park. Dense brush, marshy areas near the Anacostia River. It presents significant challenges for any search effort.
Right. And the cause of death confirmed the authorities' gravest suspicions. It was an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. Even more chillingly, the weapon found with him was forensically confirmed to be the same gun that had killed his wife, Andrea. This provided a grim, if incomplete, sense of closure regarding Tatum's own fate, solidifying the belief that he was responsible for his wife's murder, but leaving the biggest, most agonizing question hanging heavy in the air regarding Relisha.
Exactly. Despite extensive searches of Kenilworth Park and the surrounding areas, exhaustive efforts, law enforcement, volunteers, even highly trained cadaver dogs, Relisha's body has never been found. Kenilworth Park, with its challenging terrain, the dense vegetation, the wetlands, it can be an extremely difficult environment for even the most thorough search. If a body was quickly concealed or, moved by natural factors, it could be incredibly hard to locate. This truly is the core enigma of the case. A prime suspect found dead, but the child he was last seen with remains missing.
And without Relisha's body, the authorities' belief, which is that she was likely murdered by Tatum before he took his own life, it can never be definitively proven in a court of law. It means no official murder charges can ever be filed, and no definitive conclusion can really be reached.
Precisely. Without that physical evidence, the case remains officially unsolved in a legal sense, even if investigators are highly confident in their theory. This absence makes it a persistent source of anguish for her family, who are denied the closure of a burial, and a constant wellspring of speculation for anyone who follows the story. The lack of a body means there's no absolute certainty, leaving room for this heartbreaking ambiguity that just perpetuates the mystery.
So, given that agonizing ambiguity and the void of concrete answers, let's unpack the various theories that have emerged around Relisha's disappearance. Starting with the official stance of the D.C. Metropolitan Police. Their central theory, as we've discussed, is that Khalil Tatum murdered Relisha before taking his own life.
And this theory is certainly backed by a significant amount of circumstantial evidence. To the point where it's considered overwhelmingly probable by law enforcement. We have the damning surveillance footage placing Relisha with Tatum immediately before she disappeared, the last known confirmed sighting. We know Tatum had an extensive and violent criminal history, suggesting a clear propensity for dangerous and impulsive behavior. Then there's the murder of his wife, Andrea, which irrefutably demonstrates his capacity for lethal violence, followed swiftly by his own suicide, which, can often be interpreted as an act of guilt or final desperation. All these factors, when meticulously pieced together, strongly point to him as the perpetrator of what is believed to be Relisha's murder.
Right. But even with all that compelling evidence, the undeniable glaring gap remains: the definitive lack of a body. And that absence makes it impossible to fully close the case or provide absolute certainty to her family or the public. It's this crucial missing piece that fuels alternative theories and, understandably keeps the mystery alive for many who struggle to accept a conclusion without physical proof.
And those alternative theories, while often lacking direct evidence, certainly resonate deeply with people, particularly given the deeply unsettling nature of the case and the systemic failures that preceded it. One prominent theory that has circulated, especially online, is that Relisha may have been sold or trafficked. This speculation often suggests that either Tatum himself sold her, or perhaps he was part of a larger network, and his suicide might have even been sort of orchestrated to halt any further inquiry into a broader trafficking ring. It's a terrifying thought, obviously, that taps into real societal fears.
It absolutely is a terrifying thought, and one that, as you noted, often emerges in cases of missing children, especially those from vulnerable backgrounds. However, it's important to state that the D.C. Metropolitan Police have officially and repeatedly ruled out the human trafficking theory in Relisha's case.
Right. While that's the official stance, you'll still find this theory persists vigorously in online discussions and among some segments of the public. This persistence is often, I think, a reflection of broader societal concerns around child exploitation and the difficulty people have in accepting an unsolved murder without a body. However, from an investigative standpoint, police found no digital footprint, no financial transactions, or known connections to trafficking networks that would corroborate this theory for Relisha. The evidence just consistently points elsewhere.
Another theory, one born purely out of the agonizing power of hope, is the belief held by some of Relisha's family members, including her stepfather, Antonio Wheeler, that she is still alive. They cling to the possibility that Tatum may have handed her off to someone else before his death, that she's out there somewhere, perhaps living under a new identity, unaware of the search for her.
And you can absolutely understand the profound emotional basis of this theory, of course. It's the desperate, innate wish for a different, less tragic outcome for a beloved child. It's a refusal to accept the worst without definitive proof. However, like the trafficking theory, there is currently no concrete, credible evidence to support this belief. It remains fueled by love and hope, which is entirely understandable, but not by any new investigative findings that would point to her continued existence.
Beyond the specifics of what happened to Relisha, her case quickly transcended the individual tragedy. It became this powerful, undeniable indictment of DC's systemic failures. This goes far beyond just the immediate circumstances surrounding her disappearance and points to much larger, entrenched institutional issues.
Absolutely. The case laid bare the deep, alarming cracks in the system. We're talking about pervasive issues like overworked caseworkers struggling with impossibly high caseloads, critically understaffed shelters that lacked adequate security and oversight, and a shocking, almost unbelievable lack of communication and data sharing between crucial institutions like schools, social services, and law enforcement. Relisha's disappearance was, in many ways, a tragic symptom of these underlying, long-standing problems that had just been allowed to fester. In a 2013 internal audit, just months before Relisha vanished, DC General was actually flagged for its inconsistent background check procedures, particularly for contract employees like janitors, leading to a documented lack of oversight on site. This wasn't just an accident, it was a predictable outcome of systemic neglect.
It truly reinforces the heartbreaking point that the very systems designed and funded to protect her utterly failed her. Think about it. A convicted felon with a history of concerning behavior, allowed to work in a children's shelter with unsupervised access. The acceptance of obviously fake doctor's notes for weeks on end, bypassing standard truancy protocols. The incredibly delayed realization of her absence. Each one of these points represents a major breakdown, a failure to connect the dots and intervene. A series of missed opportunities that cost Relisha her safety and likely her life.
And it was this intense public scrutiny, fueled by the shock and outrage over Relisha's disappearance, that was a direct catalyst, leading to the eventual closure of the DC General Shelter in 2018. The decision to close it was controversial, sure. It sparked political battles and impacted hundreds of families who had to be relocated. But it was ultimately an acknowledgement in part of the profound institutional oversight failures that allowed such a tragedy to unfold within its walls. The facility had really become synonymous with the city's failures.
What's also critical to discuss, and something Relisha's case undeniably sparked, is a broader, uncomfortable societal discussion around the disparity in media coverage of missing children. It ignited a raw nerve, highlighting biases that many had long observed but rarely saw confronted so directly.
Yeah, the critique that emerged was powerful and pointed. It articulated a phenomenon often referred to as missing white woman syndrome. This critique highlights that Relisha's case, involving a missing black child from a homeless shelter, received noticeably less national media attention, less sustained coverage, and less immediate public urgency compared to other cases involving missing white children from more affluent backgrounds. Studies, I think the Columbia Journalism Review did one, have shown that cases involving missing black children receive, on average, significantly less initial media coverage compared to cases involving white children from affluent backgrounds, even when all other factors are equal. This isn't just an observation, it's a documented phenomenon that impacts how much urgency and resources are allocated to various cases, and ultimately, whose stories resonate most widely with the public.
And this disparity, as you can imagine, generated significant outrage across the internet, among civil rights advocates and within communities of color. It highlighted a perceived institutional failure to prioritize all missing children equally, regardless of their race or socioeconomic status. It forced a conversation that, while profoundly uncomfortable, was long overdue about whose stories get told, whose are amplified, and whose are just allowed to quietly fade into the background. It compelled many to ask, why did Relisha not garner the same immediate widespread alarm as others?
So, when we weigh all these theories and the assembled evidence, the question becomes, what's most likely? Returning to the official police theory of homicide by Khalil Tatum, it remains, from an investigative standpoint, the most probable explanation for Relisha's disappearance. The direct evidence, like the surveillance footage placing her with Tatum just before she vanished. Tatum's subsequent actions, including the murder of his wife and his own death by suicide, all fit a consistent and grim narrative of escalating violence and desperation.
And yet, despite that strong circumstantial evidence, the enduring absence of her body creates this persistent, painful void. It's that critical missing piece that leaves just enough room for alternative theories to persist, fueled either by a desperate hope for a different outcome or by a deep-seated distrust of institutions that are so clearly perceived to have failed. This lack of a definitive resting place for Relisha means the case can never truly be closed in the minds of many, perpetuating the agony for her family.
And even for those who lean towards the official theory, the logical inconsistencies and baffling elements that allowed the situation to escalate, like the initial unverified acceptance of those Dr. Tatum notes at the school, they contribute to the ongoing mystery. These weren't just minor details. They point to significant lapses that allowed a dangerous situation to fester for far too long, making the exact sequence of events leading to Relisha's fate more opaque and tragic than it ever should have been. These failures, in a way, they muddy the waters even for the most straightforward theory.
And those lapses lead us directly to the heartbreaking lessons learned from the profound cracks in the system lessons about why Relisha was so completely failed. It wasn't just one isolated failure, but a devastating confluence of them. The school's slow action on her prolonged absences, the social services' shocking failure to adequately vet staff at the shelter, the general lack of coordinated oversight across multiple agencies, from truancy officers to shelter management. It was a perfect storm of systemic neglect, wasn't it? A chain of broken links where a child's safety should have been paramount.
It truly is a heartbreaking reality. To consider a child failed by the very systems that were specifically designed and mandated to keep her safe. Relisha's story serves as a stark, urgent, and enduring reminder of the immense vulnerability of children, particularly those within the social welfare system. Their safety relies entirely on the diligence, the proper funding, and the interconnectivity of these protective services. This case, tragically, laid bare just how fragile that safety net can be. And we cannot overlook the compounding role of poverty and race here. It's not just about the immediate circumstances of Relisha's life, but also how these factors influence the subsequent media coverage and the public's perception of her case. It underscores that vulnerability is often compounded by these systemic biases, meaning some children are inherently more at risk of being overlooked or undervalued, and their stories less likely to garner the sustained and national attention that might lead to swifter resolutions.
And that's precisely why Relisha's story still resonates so powerfully a decade later. It's not merely a missing persons case, it's the stark human cost of a mystery. A tragic story of a little girl who vanished from a city's shadows, from a place that was supposed to be a temporary refuge, a sanctuary. Her face, that sweet, hopeful face, has become a symbol for so much more, for systemic failure, for the fight for justice, and for the urgent need to protect every child.
Her memory is truly kept alive by the continued, tireless efforts of her family and community, who, even after all these years, refuse to let her name and face fade from the public eye. They organize vigils, advocate for policy changes, and tirelessly fight for justice, for answers. Their enduring determination is a testament to the power of hope and the steadfast refusal to forget a child who has failed by so many.
So, as we examine these threads of truth, we see profound and conflicting narrative. The strong official theory against the agonizingly unresolved mystery of her body. The system that was meant to protect versus its stark, devastating failure. And the tragic consequences of a truth that, in its entirety, may never be fully revealed. Relisha Rudd's disappearance forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about who our society truly protects, who it tragically overlooks, and the enduring power of a mystery when definitive answers remain elusive. What does Relisha's story tell you about the shadows in our own communities, and what responsibilities do we carry to ensure no child, regardless of their circumstances, ever truly vanishes without a trace?
The disappearance of Relisha Rudd is a mystery that has lingered for a decade, a case that has remained active but stubbornly unsolved. The threads of truth are tangled in this web of systemic failures, the shadow of a monstrous predator, and the heartbreaking reality that a little girl could vanish without a trace from a place that was supposed to be her sanctuary. Was she murdered by the man who befriended her? Or is there a thread of, desperate hope that she is still out there somewhere? The complete truth of what happened to Relisha may be forever lost, but the memory of her and the tireless fight for justice will never be.
What do you think happened to Relisha Rudd? Do you believe the official theory, or do you believe there's another explanation? Join the conversation on our social media platforms using #ThreadsOfATruth and #Relisha Rudd. Next time, we examine the mysterious death of Elisa Dimitrieva, a case that would eventually connect the British royal family. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review for Threads of Truth wherever you listen. Your support helps us continue to shed light on these unsolved cases and search for the truth one thread at a time.